When I grow up, I want to work for a woke company. Like super woke.
When I grow up,
I want to be hired based on what I look like
rather than my skills.
I want to be judged
by my political beliefs.
I want to get promoted
based on my chromosomes. When I grow up,
I want to be offended by my coworkers
and walk around the office
on eggshells
and have my words policed by HR. Words like grandfather,
peanut gallery, long time no see,
no can do.
When I grow up,
I want to be obsessed with emotional safety
and do workplace sensitivity training
all day long. When I grow up, I want to climb the corporate ladder
just by following the crowd.
I want to be a conformist.
I want to weaponize my pronouns. What are pronouns?
It's time to grow up and get back to work. Introducing the #1 woke-free job board in America, redballoon.work.
Today we are going to be talking about the Kyle Rittenhouse Always Ready bundle available at armoredrepublic.com. It's a very practical kit, including everything that you need all the way from hydration to first aid to general purpose to magazine holders and to a very comfortable plate carrier. So included is the Testudo Gen 3 plate carrier, and we also have 2 C3 plates that I've included in the bundle. So these plates are multi-curve, multi-hit ceramic, so they can take multiple rounds. I really like these plates because it's going to offer level 4 protection. Thank you guys for watching. Again, you can go to armoredrepublic.com, linked below, and you can purchase your Kyle Rittenhouse Always Ready bundle today.
I thought you were going to start the show, and you didn't, so I'm so glad that you let me do this, because I was going to interrupt you anyway. Okay. So I'm so happy.
All right. I was deferring to you.
Thank you
Pastor
so
Toby,
much.
He's actually...
I was just going to... You're not going to let me.
Rivers getting
married.
Oh,
go ahead. Tell what Pastor Toby is. No, you started. See, you were doing so good, and then you messed it up.
I couldn't help it. Go ahead.
Pastor Toby. First, hey, welcome to Cross Politic. We're missing a leg. He's actually making a whole new government right now.
He's a very important leg.
Yeah, it's a very, very important leg.
It's leg day, and he's not here.
Technically, his government is expanding because his son is about to get married. And every time somebody gets married, we create a whole nother government, which is
an
so
angel
exciting.
get its wings, you know?
I didn't know that they came with angels.
Okay.
But so we're missing Pastor Toby, which is kind of gives me the freedom to kind of do whatever I want. Because usually Pastor Toby here kind of keeps us boxed in.
It's true.
And we can't be free all the time to just let the spirit move.
He's a very overbearing pastor.
He's a true Presbyterian. Grew up that way. But I was at a conference this weekend, and I was with Jason Whitlock through his conference, Roll Call 2.0. Fantastic conference. And there was a guy there. First, Vody was there. Hello.
Good to see Vody,
E.W. Jackson. Wow. Mark, amazing group of guys there.
Yeah.
But they had some singers there. And one of the singers, Jeffrey Steele, I believe is his name, songwriter, country songwriter, been around for 40 years. Great songwriter. He wrote this song for Aaron Lewis, I believe, called Am I the Only One? Okay. And so I really wanted to start this whole show out with this song. I'm going to mess it up. I know it's not going to.
How long is the song?
This song is about 4 minutes long, and I'm feeling led by the Spirit. I don't know. We might listen to the whole 4 minutes. Ooh. So, Davis, you might have to buckle up and hold on for a second, because we got Davis Younts here. Yes, we're going to talk about Trump. Yes, we're going to talk about how crazy things are in the court. Yes, we're going to talk about lawfare.
Yeah.
This is for you to get everybody that are your friends, because I see you right now. I see how many people on here. There's hundreds of people on here. I want you to go tell your friends David Younts about to blow the lid off this joker. So, y'all go get it ready. Tell your peoples. While you're doing that, I'm going to mess all this up. I don't care. We're going to listen to some of this song because I think it sets the stage for what's going on. All right, here we go.
Oh, we got the music video and everything.
Oh, yeah. Sing it.
Am I the only one here tonight? Shaking my head and thinking something ain't right. Is it just me? Am I losing my mind? Am I standing on the edge of the end of time? Am I the only one?
Nope.
Tell me I'm not. Who thinks of taking all the good we got and turning it bad? Hell, I'll be damned. I think I'm turning into my old man. Am I the only one willing to bleed or take a bullet for being free? Screaming, what the hell am I
Stay 6 feet apart.
Willing to fight for my love of the red and white and the blue. Burning on the ground, another statue coming down in a town near you. Watching the threads of old glory come undone. Am I the only one not brainwashed? Making my way through the land of the lost, who sees it as it is and worries about his kids as they try to undo all the things he did. Am I the only one who can't take no more screaming? If you don't like it, there's a freaking door. This ain't the freedom we've been fighting for. It was something more. Yeah, it was something more. Am I the only one willing to fight for my love of the red and white and the blue? Burning on the ground, another statue coming down in a town near you. Watching the threads of old glory come undone. Not the only one.
Okay. All right. That's enough. That's enough.
That's a gripping song, man.
Man, that song hit me.
So did he sing
hard.
that at the Whitlock's roll call?
Jeffrey Steele sung that, and I'm not gonna lie. I think Jeffrey killed it. I didn't want to hear
better than this guy.
Yeah, to me.
Yeah.
Because I was filming.
That's still pretty good.
I was filming, and he turned me around. And here's the first thing that caught me: the masculinity in the voice, the low tone. Am I the only one? I was like, yo, that's some testosterone. And what he was singing about, it was just like, the timing of it was perfect. And the COVID, I think he dropped this 2 years ago. Okay. And there's been a revolt of people who have been in the industry, but were kind of punk rock. And they're watching everybody just go along with the system. Everybody just going along with what happened. Shut your doors. Don't go to church. Put on this mask. Take this vaccine. Am I the only one that think this is insane? Yeah. And it hit hard. And I was like, since we're going to talk about Trump today, and I can't be the only one thinking this is, and this is, I think this is crossing both sides of the aisle. Yeah. If this was happening on the other side of the aisle, I'm like, wait a second. I want a fair trial. Right. Whatever fair trial is, I want that. Right. And if we're not getting that, this ain't righteous.
Right.
So,
and both sides should want that.
Both sides should want that.
Before we get to Davis Younts and President Trump, backwards planning financial. Are you thinking differently about your family's finances?
I'm not the only one.
While others worry about surviving to the next paycheck or the next election, the hand of the diligent will rule, while the slothful, you got to say that, you got to stumble over that, will be put to forced labor. Train your mindset to see where God is moving, where to invest and build, so you can create, protect, and pass on wealth. Where's your plan to use your economic power? Joe Garrissey, with Backwards Planning Financial, coaches his clients to make this kind of impact in their world for generations. By integrating investments, debt, insurance, tax-efficient strategies, and legacy planning, go to backwardsfinancialplanning.com to connect with them. I also had Joe on our show recently, on Business Makers recently. Okay. And Joe will be coming on our show in September to talk more on this. It was a very good conversation on Business Makers. You can go catch that in the last Business Makers podcast that dropped 2 Fridays ago and everything. So check that out too, and you'll find out more about Joe and what he's doing.
Thank you, Joe.
Secondly, Fight Laugh Feast magazine. Our Fight Laugh Feast magazine is a quarterly issue that packs a punch like 21-year Belvini. If you don't like this ad, I don't know what's wrong. No ice. Don't put any ice in your Belvini. We don't water down our scotch. Why would we water down our theology? Order a yearly subscription for yourself, and then send a couple yearly subscriptions to President Trump, to Biden, to all the crazies out there. To
there's
your
a lot
friends,
of subscriptions that need to be sent
there's
out.
A lot of
there's a lot of subscriptions we need to send.
Seriously, it's actually a great play. We used to when Credenza Agenda was our local magazine. Now it's the Fight Laugh Feast magazine. But when Credenza Agenda was around, people would pay for subscriptions to other people.
Smart move.
And it's a great way to do it. It goes on their coffee table. They have to read it or at least look at it. So, buy a friend a subscription who needs to stop drinking the Kool-Aid. Every quarter we promise quality food for the soul, wine for the heart, and some Red Bull for turning over tables. Our magazine will include cultural commentary, a psalm of the quarter, recipes for feasting, laughter sprinkled throughout the glossy pages, and more. Sign up today at fightlaughfeast.com And as you sign up, email us, contact@fightlaughfeast.com, and we'll send you a free magazine as kind of a beginning of your subscription to sign up with us. So you get a free magazine. But you got to email us because we need a direct contact.
We want to sell you more stuff. Look, that's just what it is. We want to sell you more stuff. If you send us your email, we'll give you something free first. It'll bait you, and then you'll come to us.
Anna needs a process. So she needs an address. Sure. So, email your receipt to Anna at fightlaughfeast.com or contact@fightlaughfeast.com. She'll get it either way, and we'll send you a magazine. So, with that said, Davis Younts, our lawyer. I mean, let's just
he don't know
admit it. He's pro bono with Cross Politic, and comes on regularly. We love having him on because every time he comes on, he's talking good shop with us. Yeah. So one of our favorite lawyers. Welcome to the show, Davis Younts.
Thanks, gentlemen. Hey, I didn't know Pastor Toby wasn't going to be here. I wouldn't have come on without him.
That's fair enough.
That's why we didn't tell you.
Heads up.
That's why we didn't tell you. We know how you are. No, we're not surprised. No, man. Hey, what did you think about that song, man?
Oh, that was awesome, man. That gave me chills.
Yes?
I definitely have felt that way over the last couple of years, for sure.
Am I the only one?
Yeah, it's real tough.
So, all right. So the whole Trump thing happened. Okay, he had this trial back in, I guess, January. Was it? When was the trial?
April.
Okay. So he had the trial back in April and then just got convicted by the jury. The jury just decided, yeah, he's guilty. As I understand, I'm just going to say how I understand this.
Here we go.
Because
now I'm missing Pastor Toby too.
As I understand it, yeah, exactly. He basically was on trial for some accounting alleged, nomenclature where they put the expense down as one thing, and the jury convicted him for like this wrong expense nomenclature.
Can I help you?
Yeah. You got
Davis. Why was Trump on trial?
All right.
So, Gabe, you're actually really close, right? So the issue is falsifying business records. Yes. You owe me for that, brother.
You do.
That, right? You owe him. So that is right. It's a question of what were line items properly accounted for, or were they accounted for falsely with fraudulent intent? In other words, when he was signing checks, signing off on books, was the information accurate, or was it done falsely and fraudulently? So that was the allegation.
So, that seems like such almost a subjective thing. And I mean, I got so many questions. Like, why is Stormy Daniels there then? Why is Michael, his former lawyer, there? It like to me, like this trial, I don't know. It just leaves so many unanswered questions.
Yeah. So let me set the kind of just give a baseline so we can understand what he was facing. The reality is most individuals that are involved in falsifying a business record like this are never prosecuted. It's not an issue. It's chalked up to an accounting error, a line item error, or something else. It really is extremely rare in New York for anybody to be prosecuted for something like this.
New York.
Typically, it only comes out when there's some other criminal act out there. There's multiple criminal acts, so it just sort of gets swept up, and it's a throwaway charge. The original charge, falsifying business records, is a misdemeanor offense with a 2-year statute of limitations. These events happened over 7 years ago. So just as an underlying issue, the statute of limitations was gone, meaning this couldn't be prosecuted, and it's typically treated as a misdemeanor. So it's not something that it's highly discretionary to even bring it up in the first place. But what the state of New York did in this case is turn it into a felony by alleging that he falsified business records. So he had the intent to falsify business records, and he did it with the intent of committing some other crime. But just so people can understand, in reality, and I'm looking at this as someone who's been involved in over 200 criminal trials, either as a prosecutor or as a defense attorney. The defense in this case was told, okay, we're charging you with a felony for falsifying records, and you're doing it to either cover up or commit another crime. But we're not going to tell you what that other crime is in the formal indictment. We're not going to tell you what that other crime is until we get to trial. And when we get to trial, we're going to have 3 different theories as to what that other possible crime is. And the judge isn't going to make us prove that other possible crime. We're just going to have to allege it was one of three. Pick which one you want. You can't defend against any of them. And if the jury thinks you falsified these records and you had the intent to commit some other crime, doesn't really matter which one, pick any of them, and you don't have to be unanimous on that, then you've been convicted of a felony. So as a starting point, that seems like an oversimplification. It's not. That's what was going on in this case. That's what happened in this trial.
Wow.
That's highly unusual, to say the least. But just understand, walking into that, how would you as a defendant, how would I as a defense attorney defend against a generalized criminal intent, a generalized, oh, you may have committed one of three or may have had the intent to cover up one of three other crimes. And we don't have to prove which one. We don't have to prove any of them, really. We just have to prove in general that may have been your intent. And then we can turn this into a felony. The felony matters because it sounds bad for PR purposes, but also that's what got them around the statute of limitations in the first place, is turn it into a felony. The statute of limitation is longer, and then they can bring this underlying charge.
How do you turn this into a felony? Like, what is the process they went through? It's like, oh, we can get trouble if we make this a felony, so let's make this felony.
RICO charges or something.
How did they turn,
like another?
Yeah, how do they turn? Like, how did they do that? Make the turn into a felony?
So it's an enhancement. So that's what's crazy about it. But the way the law works is you have the charge, right, a misdemeanor charge, and then you can enhance the charge by adding something else to it, adding another layer of intent to it. So this is exactly what the state of Iowa did to Michael Cassidy in the Satan statue case.
That's right.
It was a misdemeanor offense, and they added an enhancement, which was a hate crimes enhancement, which turned it into a felony. That's exactly what the state of New York did here. And when you do an enhancement like that, if the judge isn't very careful with the instructions, it's a wild area of the law where you don't really have to prove the enhancement the same way you have to prove the underlying crime if the judge doesn't get the instructions right. And that's really what happened to Trump here, is they didn't have to prove the crime that was part of the enhancement. They just had to prove there was a falsified business record and there was intent to cover up or commit some other crime.
Davis, if you, I got so many questions here. This is interesting because can I just lay out a bunch of them and then you can just pick what you want, like a smorgasbord?
Sure,
can I do that?
Absolutely.
Do you think that one of them is, do you think that Trump is actually guilty of falsifying business records? The other one is, if you don't have to prove that the person that he could have been intentionally
falsifying.
No. If what's the I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember the part that you just said, that it's possible that one of the three things that he did he could have been guilty of. I can't remember how did you say that, Davis? I can't be
the enhancement, the other crime,
right?
That
Yeah,
if you don't have to records,
if you don't have
for this
to
other purpose,
if you don't have to prove those, then how could you be guilty of anything there?
Right. I mean, that's the question. That's the problem with this case. So to start with the falsifying records, look, there are records that don't appear to match up from an accounting standpoint what they were used for. Now, even that's not very clear because you have to rely solely on Michael Cohen's testimony. And what's interesting is he never made any more money. He made a certain amount of money. It was clear for several years he made the same amount of money as Trump's attorney. The year that he supposedly got over $100,000 in hush money payments to funnel to Stormy Daniels, he made the same amount of money. There's no spike of $130,000. So there are questions there. Were all the records accurate? No, but could you ever prove intent? I don't think you could prove that Donald Trump, as the president of the company, had a specific intent to falsify those records. I don't think you could get that.
Okay, wait, before hold on. Let's just say for a second that we found it, the smoking gun, he falsified records. Punishment is?
A misdemeanor offense would have been probation, maybe a fine. But also in this case, it could never have been brought to trial because it's 7 years old. It would have been needed to be brought to trial within 2 years.
Do you think that this accounting revelation to the city of New York came out of Trump being forced to release his tax records? You remember that? Like, how did they figure,
that he falsified
his records?
So I do think it could have come from the tax records, but here's an important point that not everybody's talking about this. This was investigated by the feds. This hush money payment to Stormy Daniels, this alleged payment, was investigated by the feds to determine whether or not the feds thought there was probable cause to charge him with a violation of federal election law. The feds declined to do that. Why does that matter? Because one of the three choices that they had to allege of an unlawful act was a violation of federal election law. Right. So the Fed said, we don't have enough here. And looks like they're prosecuting Trump for anything with, based on a very low standard. But here the feds looked at it and said there wasn't a federal election law violation worthy of bringing charges on.
And so they didn't like what the feds did. So can we talk about what the defense? I really want to know how you would have defended against this in this situation, since you understand the whole situation very well. But also, what was not allowed by the defense to bring into the conversation or to court that would have helped? Is there anything there that you thought would have helped them make a better case that they weren't allowed to bring in?
Yeah, so I think that when you look at the actual trial and how it unfolded in front of the jurors, I think there were a couple critical pieces. One is the Trump team had a federal election law expert. In other words, someone who was prepared to come in and testify as an expert witness and explain why, even if you found he falsified these records, there was no intentional violation or no violation of federal election law. And I think that's critical because that really was the heart of the government's case. Can we prove he had the intent to commit some other crime, to violate federal election law? And they had this expert lined up that could have explained that to the jury to say there was no other crime. They were not allowed. The judge prohibited them from bringing that testimony. And I think that's a critical piece in all this. You have this expert witness. You cannot bring that testimony out. I think that was very significant in my mind.
Was Stormy Daniels put on the witness stand?
Stormy Daniels testified.
Yeah.
To me, the two key witnesses in this case were Stormy Daniels and then Michael Cohen.
But an expert on the Constitution.
Yeah. But okay, so the rub with me, the Stormy Daniels thing is to me just, I don't get it. Because apparently there's this letter floating around where she said she never had sexual relations with Trump. She signed it and all that stuff. Apparently there's two different letters. And then she got called to this trial and she testified where, apparently she testified at the trial that she did have sexual relations with Trump. Is the letter legitimate? Is it real? Is it true? Or, what's the truth in this situation?
Or should have even been allowed to be a witness?
Yeah, she should even testify in this thing.
Yeah, so there is at least one letter that she has admitted publicly, and previous attorneys for her have admitted publicly was legitimate. So there is no question that prior to trial, she wrote and signed a letter where she denied ever having any kind of relationship with President Trump. She came in at trial and she testified in detail about the relationship. So her testimony was absolutely in direct contradiction to previous public out-of-court statements. That is allowed. A witness can come in and say things like that, and it comes down to then a jury to make a credibility determination based on the cross-examination and an overall credibility analysis.
Was Trump allowed to submit that letter to the jury?
She was cross-examined on those prior statements very thoroughly.
Why? I don't understand how a person who is an expert on the Constitution, they would have to be cross-examined by the other side too. So why not bring that into the courtroom to have the conversation about?
Right. And again, it goes back to this issue of what makes this a felony, what made it possible for the government to even indict President Trump after the passing of the statute of limitations was the fact that some other crime was committed, but the defense wasn't allowed to raise evidence to contradict this other crime, this supposed other crime that was committed. So again, that just seems bizarre. That seems out of the norm. That seems radical to us. And it really would have been extremely difficult to defend someone if you can't challenge that. I mean, I take this back to the Michael Cassidy case in Iowa. And again, he was charged with damaging property and he was charged with a hate crime. Imagine going into that case and the judge saying, jury, you must find, if you believe he destroyed the statue, you must find him guilty of a hate crime or that he did that with hate. and the defense isn't allowed to talk about or defend against the hate crime piece. I mean, it feels impossible. Particularly, it feels unfair and difficult when they had 3 different options to choose from, and the judge instructed them, you don't have to agree on what it was. You just have to believe he did it and had some general other unlawful intent in mind.
How would, knowing this is your hand and this is the one that's dealt with you and you had to be Trump's defense attorney, how do you deal with this situation?
You know, it's really hard because the law has evolved in our nation, right? So you have this whole critical theory that eroded the law much faster than it did other things. And so you have this idea of the common law being subject to evolution and changing over time. And one of the things that's happened that's been a fundamental breakdown of freedom and liberty in our country is that jurors are instructed now that they're not allowed to nullify the actions of the government. What do I mean by that? Jury nullification is this principle that our founding fathers believed in very deeply, which is a jury could vote not guilty even if they thought there was a violation of the law, maybe a technical violation of the law. They could find someone not guilty because they believed there was government overreach, government was doing something wrong, or it wasn't appropriate to convict this person under these facts and circumstances. Right? Whatever the justification was, they could nullify the prosecution. They could nullify the law as applied to this individual. We have gone away from that. We've gone radically away from that. So one of the things you would have to look at in a case like this with those instructions is trying to compel a jury to do the right thing regardless of anything else, which can be very, very challenging. And again, you're looking at a situation where there's always been fundamental questions about the fairness of the jury pool, the fairness of the jury itself, and whether or not he could get a fair trial in that location under those circumstances. So that's the challenge. So none of this was easy for his attorneys. And, you know, we can talk about the judge and some of the things that happened, but I do think the judge had a huge influence on the outcome of this case.
Go ahead.
I'm going to read this.
Go ahead.
You got a question?
Yeah,
you got
I do.
a question? Okay, yeah. Page 50 is distinctly Christian marketing company striving to help Christian-owned businesses grow and succeed in our digital age. They don't want to just make a paycheck. They want to change the world, and that means building it alongside you. The mission is bigger than just Sunday. Page 50 wants to help Christians recapture the work week, economic and political influence, and the public square. Page 50 doesn't work with just anybody, but if you're a believer, they want to work with you. Visit page 50. I got it spelled out. It says, I did a Biden prompter thing here. It says visit page 50, and then it has parentheses. You got to spell it out.
And you read that part.
Yeah, I read that part.
The quiet part.
That's good. That's page 50. That's PAGE 50, spelt out. 50. Page 50, all spelt out and everything. So that's page 50. So go to page50.com and get to chat with our boy Stuart over there. And he'll actually be at the Fight Laugh Feast conference in October. So, Knox.
Davis, so it sounds like you just told me that jury nullification is all but gone. Is that correct?
Or
that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Okay. It's been essentially eliminated from all court processes.
So then if that's the case, one of the things that our forefathers are seeing with jury nullification is the fact that something has happened in the law that people are not taking into account of why this thing happened, and it's to be more human so that it lays on top of the situation properly so that we don't misjudge a situation because the law is so stiff. Is that a fair way to say that?
Absolutely. Thomas Jefferson took it a step farther, and he said that the jury was the only anchor yet imagined in the mind of man by which a government could be held to the principles of its constitution.
Wow. Okay, so you just went there. You just went there because you know where I'm going now. Because I got to ask you, people have been talking about it. The Trump trial comes and the people are seeing it, and everybody's wondering, is the Constitution dead?
So here's where my biases are gonna come out.
Please save us, Davis.
All right. So first and foremost, I think conservatives and many Christians, but conservatives as a whole have engaged in almost KJV only level worship of the Constitution in our country.
Yo, you better stop.
And that is very, very dangerous. And it has been dangerous because our Constitution does not work in a vacuum. It was not designed to work in a vacuum. It was written. It was designed by people who were thoroughly versed in the Bible. The book of Deuteronomy was the single book cited the second most at the Constitutional Convention by the founding fathers. So everything about the Constitution assumes biblical principles and biblical law. So we have this conversation about the Constitution is dead. Well, the Constitution itself is not the problem. We are the problem. We need revival. We have to go back to those principles because the Constitution was not designed for a secular humanist people that worship man instead of God.
The Constitution, the people are dead, not the Constitution, is what you're saying.
That's right. Absolutely.
Okay, so then there's this weird thing that starts to happen in my head, which is, okay, as we're in this transition, what are our processes or marching orders in one sense to try and say, can these dead bones live? Yes, they absolutely can. In the meantime, I don't want them to kill me. So I have two parts of engagement here. How do we go about dealing with dead people who are operating with the Constitution and using it? In this case, it seems like a weapon.
Right. So I think what we have failed to do and what we need to do is we need to, and you talked about it with Pastor Toby. Listen, we need Christians and conservatives to be involved in local government. District attorneys, county level district attorneys are elected by the people.
Yeah.
Barack Obama and George Soros understood this so clearly that they invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into getting these Soros-funded DAs into office. That sounds like a political talking point. That sounds like, oh, you're being hyperbolic. You're saying these things for clickbait. No, that's what they did. I mean, that's what happened to Michael Cassidy in Iowa. That's why there was a hate crime. It was a Soros-funded prosecutor. So the first thing we have to do is remember all politics are local. And we need to be engaging. If you don't know who your district attorney is in your county, you are failing because that is the first line of defense when it comes to that. We need district attorneys. We need people working in district attorneys' offices that understand and value the Constitution more than anything else. And then we look at judges. We look at local judges. They're predominantly elected in this country. We need to look at those things. But we have ceded that ground because far too many of us get so caught up in what happens in Washington, we forget what happens on the local level. And really, that's more likely to impact our lives on a daily basis.
What does Trump's appeal process look like?
Yeah, so he has a couple things that he could try to appeal before his sentencing. His sentencing is currently scheduled for July 11th. Those things that you can appeal while you're waiting for sentencing are very few and far between. There's not really anything significant that's going to happen there. So what I would expect is anything that's filed before his sentence, the verdict is not considered final until after sentencing. The case isn't considered final, and it really can't be appealed effectively until after that. So he's going to be looking at several issues. It'll be interesting to see which are predominant. I think the most important issues, the best chance of actually getting relief start with the jurisdictional issue. Was this charged properly? And did the idea of adding a felony enhancement to a misdemeanor circumvent the statute of limitations? I could see appellate court looking at this and say, this case should never have been brought because it was outside the statute of limitations. You can't revive dead charges by throwing an enhancement on there. So I think that's one issue. I think the other issue is going to be evidentiary issues. Did the judge create reversible error by not allowing certain evidence to be presented? I think the best example is this expert witness. And then I think an appellate court is going to have to look at other errors the judge made with regard to the jury instructions as far as what was the crime that made this a felony. Did the jury really have to find that beyond a reasonable doubt that they have to agree on that? But then there's something else happened during closing argument that I think was really, really significant. And I'll summarize it very quickly.
Please take
the government made an over the top, inappropriate argument in closing argument that went directly against the judge's instructions, and then the defense objected, and the judge overruled that objection. So in other words, the district attorney argued, Trump violated the election law because Michael Cohen pled guilty to an election law violation. So, based on that, that's what Trump did. Defense stood up and objected. The judge overruled that objection, meaning he allowed the jury to hear that. But the judge's instructions said specifically, you cannot consider the fact that Michael Cohen pled guilty to that offense to find Trump guilty here. So that was in the jury instructions. The judge knew it was in the jury instructions. Yeah. The prosecutor knew it was in the jury instructions. The prosecutor argued it anyway because it was a very powerful argument. When the defense objected, the judge made the wrong ruling and overruled that objection, allowing the government to argue that. And so the jury is left with the impression, okay, I can find him guilty based on the fact inappropriately that Michael Cohen pled guilty to some crime. So again, that seems crazy that would happen. What the judge should have done is said, stop. I'm going to sustain that objection. You are not allowed to conclude that President Trump is guilty simply because Michael Cohen pled guilty. You actually can't even consider that on the issue of guilt or innocence. You can just consider that on whether or not someone who's pled guilty to a crime is credible.
Right.
But so that is a huge error. That's the kind of error an appellate court could look at and say, yeah, that's too much. That could have had too significant of an impact on this case.
But the appellate court's in New York, right? I mean, like, he's
Correct.
Appealing to the same kangaroo state that did this in the first place.
Well, not only that, but the reality is that most criminal cases that go up on appeal, the appeals are not successful. So the appellate courts are not supposed to just go in and arbitrarily change the findings, change a verdict or anything else. So there are standards typically, to be a reversible error, you have to say the judge abused their discretion, which is a fairly high standard.
So do you think this is going to eventually end up at the Supreme Court?
It could. I think that the Supreme Court is likely not going to want to take up the case unless there's one of these underlying issues that really has constitutional implications that go beyond just the state of New York and the nuances of New York law or evidentiary instructions or other things. So it is not often that the Supreme Court actually weighs in on a state criminal case.
There's a couple of things here. So what is, as a sentencing, what type of sentencing is he looking at? Like, what's the worst that can happen? Because I think a lot of people are saying, wait, is there anything in the sentencing that would say Trump can't run for president? And if not, do we care?
So this is fascinating. So the way sentencing works in New York in most state cases is there will be a pre-sentencing report that's prepared. Both sides will present written matters, character letters, and things like that to the judge. And then the judge will exercise discretion within a range to issue a punishment. In this case, Trump was convicted of a felony E. So New York has A, B, C, D, and E felonies. So this was a nonviolent felony E. So the range the judge could give is from probation up to 4 years in jail. So the maximum punishment is 4 years. Out of all of the cases in recent decades that have had falsifying business records as something that was part of the conviction, 10% have resulted in jail time. Of those, almost all of them involved multiple other crimes. So you just don't see falsifying business records alone on a charge sheet, like in this case. So that makes this case unique. So a couple things about that. Is he actually facing jail time? He is facing jail time. Would it be normal for someone in his situation with no prior criminal history, has no prior criminal convictions, to get jail time for a felony E in New York? Absolutely not. That would be abnormal. But right, I don't want to jump.
This whole thing is abnormal.
Yeah. Right. So, does a felony conviction prevent him from running and being elected president? It does not. Technically, it does not. Could some states try and take him off the ballot based on a felony conviction? They could try. I don't think there's going to be a success there. Could he be running for president from prison? He could. He could be trying to get elected from Rikers Island. That's possible. But I think what's interesting about this case, just thinking about it purely from a litigation strategy standpoint, think about sentencing, right? So a judge is going in and is considering sentencing, and a judge is supposed to look at factors in coming up with a sentence. So they're supposed to look at the protection of society, the rehabilitation of the defendant. They're supposed to look at the level of remorse and accountability that a defendant has taken in assessing their potential to be rehabilitated. So in this case, you have President Trump, who said a lot of negative things and then walked out of the court and said, hey, this whole thing was a kangaroo court.
Right.
So there's no remorse. There's none of that. And so really it's sentencing. When I'm preparing for a sentencing case, I'm either trying to mitigate, which is I help my client, take accountability for what they can, where it was proper that they were convicted of, or I'm going to go nuclear. And when I say that, what I mean is I'm going to raise every single issue, a potential appeal that I can in order to try to get the judge to show leniency in sentencing to reduce the chance that we would continue on with an appeal. So, for example, I had a case in Pennsylvania. It involved like child endangerment. The judge made a terrible ruling, didn't allow me to put on an expert witness. I think that would have been reversed on appeal. I raised all of that pre-sentencing, presented that all to the judge. And ultimately, when my clients, the DA was asking for 5 years, my clients got no jail time. They got probation and nothing else. And I do think a factor in that was the judge didn't think we would appeal if the only outcome was probation. And she was right. In this case, I don't know what good that does, because this judge knows there's going to be an appeal anyway, where every single thing he did throughout the trial is going to be called into question.
Right.
No judge likes to get reversed. So that's what's going to be interesting as far as a strategy goes for sentencing, because none of the normal rules are going to apply here. And I think Trump's team is going to have to continue to press hard and say this whole thing was unfair. This whole thing was unjust. It wasn't right, which gives the judge some ammunition to go higher than they would otherwise in a first offense nonviolent felony case.
Davis, I'm sorry, Gabe, I just jumped all over this.
That comment, Davis' last comment, is basically saying that it's possible that Trump could get some jail time because of the nature of what the appeal would look like and all that stuff. Is that correct, Davis?
It is. And again, what the judge is supposed to look at rehabilitation potential. The first step on the road to rehabilitation is accepting responsibility, showing remorse, showing you can be reformed. That's not going to happen in this case, right? And perhaps it shouldn't. And I don't think it does Trump any good to take accountability or ownership over these things if he didn't do them, if he didn't have the criminal intent. That wouldn't be appropriate. But that gives the judge ammunition to lean towards a harsher punishment. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but it certainly could.
Setup for it.
So could you really see a scenario where Trump, let's say, got 6 months in jail, which would put him through December in prison?
Practically speaking, I don't think they would do that. I think the practical implications for a former president are just, I just think that would be wild. Could the judge be arguably legally justified and defend it? Yes. Would an appellate court necessarily overturn that as an unjust or unharsh sentence, just as far as the sentence is concerned? They probably would not.
Lo, we need revival. Davis, two things. I'm going to give you the last word on this. But before we get there, before we get to your last word, you said something earlier that I really took to heart. You said that critical theory came in and changed our legal system.
Yeah.
Would you just walk through for us really clearly how and when that happened and what it actually did to our legal system that's different after this is now here?
Yeah, and there's some scholarly debate about when it really, took hold.
Yeah.
But understand that right around the turn of the century, you had, Darwinian evolutionary theory come out. And one of the things that has happened is critical theory started creeping into law schools, and the idea became that case law was the priority. So not statutory law, not established principles that stand firm and stay true, but rather case law. So this whole idea of precedential decisions and giving all of this weight to precedent came in. And so what happens in law school, when I went to law school, really since the early 1910, that time frame, if you started going to law school, then this evolutionary theory, critical theory had already creeped into these law schools. So what you did is you didn't study the law. I didn't spend time in law school studying the law. I spent time studying cases. studying decisions that occurred and talking about how to argue the implications of that decision. Not a lot of time talking about the statute or anything else. And this blew me away. But constitutional law in law school, my test was not about the Constitution, not about knowledge of the Constitution, but it was literally how I would get points on my exam, my essay exam, every time I created a creative argument to argue how and why the federal government should be able to uphold a regulation in a particular set of facts based on the Commerce Clause, the Necessary and Proper Clause, or something else to expand federal power. All the different ways I could argue the federal government should be allowed to do that. That was my constitutional law class. That was it. It wasn't First Amendment. It wasn't, this is what the Constitution, this isn't where it came from. This is what it evolved from. This is the philosophical underpinnings of our Constitution. It was how many different ways can you argue based on case law and ever expanding, changing, evolving case law and precedent to further expand government power to regulate businesses in individual states.
So, but I mean, that's awful. But on the other side of that is case law. We're for case law as long as it's grounded in law.
Well, case law is the working out of the established law that's there. How does we apply the foundations of the law to this situation that the law hasn't explicitly spelled out?
And what other cases might
it sounds like that they've done is taken case law and have manipulated the foundational pieces of the law.
Foundation.
So they can make whatever they want out of this monster. They make their own Frankenstein.
There's no foundation.
Go ahead, Davis. You're the professional here.
No, you're absolutely right. That's the issue. If you don't have a foundation and you don't understand the underlying foundation or the reasoning for it, then you're just dealing with evolving case law after case law after case law, right? So like, what were so many people upset about the overturning of Roe v. Wade? Oh, we can't overturn this precedent. But the Supreme Court, the majority said, no, there's a deeper principle here, right? They didn't go as far as I think they should have, which is the deeper principle is the preservation of life.
That's right.
But they did say there's a deeper principle that's called federalism. That's our constitutional system. The federal government doesn't have the authority to regulate this area. That's what they said, right? So it doesn't matter what the precedent says. There's a legal principle. There's a constitutional principle that holds greater weight. That is rare. And you don't even study that in most law schools.
So with a seven-headed monster like that, are you screwed studying the Constitution?
Yeah.
Because if that's what you're studying, I mean, if you try and bring it up, it's like, yes, but the case law all of a sudden supersedes the foundation law. You're done.
Well, I will say this, that Thomas Jefferson quote that I told you earlier, I use that all the time in closing arguments in front of juries. And I think it has a very significant impact on them.
Boy, we're back to
and so our juries can still do the right thing. Our juries can still do the right thing.
Wow.
We better get active.
So what do you think is, like, this is uncharted territory, at least I would think. Maybe there's some other kangaroo stuff happening with past presidents in the past in our history, and I don't know.
We've always had kangaroo moments.
I'm sure there's always something. But this really does seem like a whole new thing for America. And how do you think this plays out in our election in November?
So, this is the first time a former president has been convicted of a crime after leaving office. First time. Now, there are people who've had criminal convictions that served as president. I can't remember who, but that's not unprecedented. People have run for president that were felons. They've been on the ballot for president. It is unprecedented. What it does usher in is an era of lawfare. It has expanded the battlefield, if you will, from the ballot box to the courtroom, right? So when we talk about election interference or other things, this is a way to try to win an election or to influence or interfere with an election outside of the ballot box. So now we're expanding where we fight elections out. That sets a dangerous precedent, right? It should be about the votes, citizens voting on election day and the outcome of the election. Now we're expanding it. We're using other outside pressures to influence election results. That's dangerous because how far are we going to go down that path? Where does that end? And what I don't want to see, while it would certainly guarantee a lot of money to be made by lawyers, is the farther we go down a lawfare path. Criminal prosecutions, legal processes should not be used to vindictively go after and seek revenge on political enemies. That is just a dangerous thing to do. And we take away, when we do that, we run the risk of taking away the authority of the American people. It is a government of the people, by the people, for the people to influence elections at the ballot box. So when we look forward to November, it's very, very difficult to understand the implications. I would like to think that people will see this. They'll be terrified of the tyranny of a government that would be engaged in this level of political and legal persecution of a political enemy. At the same time, it's possible that if people aren't paying attention, if we don't have revival, if people are just addicted to comfort rather than paying attention to what's going on around them, they'll see this and be like, well, President Trump must have done something wrong. So I guess that's another reason not to vote for him, or I'm not going to bother to vote for him this time.
Davis,
after all, he's a convicted criminal.
The only thing that I could think about as you were talking, I was thinking, boy, wait till Republicans get a hold of this.
That was my follow-up question. Is like, are we creating a pendulum here?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Davis, I'll let you answer Gabe's final question, and then I'll let you close with your final words. Closing remarks.
Gabe, you got to give me your question again. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
He's depressed over here.
Are we creating a pendulum here? Like, now when Trump gets in office, let's go get him.
Well, that is something that I would argue is somewhat unprecedented in American history, right? So we can go back, we can look at the difference between the American Revolution and the French Revolution, right?
Yeah.
And the difference is the French Revolution was a secular, humanist, man-worshiping revolution, and it resulted in a full pendulum swinging. You just traded one tyrant, really, the king, for thousands of tyrants, right? And it created this, many of the people involved in the French Revolution were killed themselves in the fallout from it. We've never really done that in the United States. The American Revolution was based on limited principles, limited government, the doctrine of the lesser magistrate. There was a biblical basis for the American Revolution that occurred, and so it was limited in that regard. And there was a strong desire, even as the battles were being fought on the battlefield, to have a biblical foundation for the government that would come out in America. So that's unprecedented for us. But what we risk is a Christless conservatism. So there is a risk that what becomes more important than the Constitution, the law, legal principles, foundational American values and principles is whatever team wins exercises power to their benefit and uses these systems that are in place to punish the other party. So there's an argument to be made that the Republican Party just is not as good at this as the Democrat Party. If we just talk about jerseys and putting on jerseys, the Republican Party hasn't invested millions and millions and millions of dollars to get liberal, progressive, critical theory DAs elected that are willing to pursue power and to persecute people simply because they disagree. Republican Party hasn't done that. So one thing will be the Republican Party is not as good at it, but there is absolutely a danger. If we're talking about Christless conservatism, there's a danger that someone gets into power and just wields that power for their side. And that's always a danger.
Final words.
I think that we can be frustrated and depressed about the outcome of this trial. We can scratch our heads and say, why was it even brought? How could a jury do this? But ultimately, I think we have to go back to basic and simple questions. The reality is, I think President Trump is a fallen man. He's a sinful human being like all of us. And we don't want to err on the side of ignoring character flaws and other things simply because of this persecution. But this is persecution. If it can happen to a former president, it can happen to any of us. So the question is, what do we do? And the answer is not civil war or angry memes or getting upset. The answer is get involved at the local level, pray for revival, be engaged in your church, have a community around you. But again, I can't emphasize this enough. Who is your DA? Who is the elected DA in your county? When are they up for reelection? Who are they? Why does it matter? And if they're not someone who's going to follow the Constitution and do what's right, then why aren't you encouraging someone or finding someone to run against them? Because that's the level we have to get involved in this, because that's what they were able to successfully do. That doesn't get to the federal level, but it certainly helps in cases like this.
Davis, I can't thank you enough for
really
your
helpful.
sanity.
Super helpful.
Your tone in this, your wisdom in this, your patience in this. I think there's one side is being radical, and then they're doing it. And the other side wants to be radical, and they're getting emotionally there and raised. And the way that you're having this conversation is, should I say, like an adult, a grown man adult. And instead of being I'm seeing my friends take the bait because they're so frustrated about what's going on. And I'm just grateful, somebody who knows the law, who knows the scripture, and as well as knows how to work in the system and knows what we can do. Because I think the helplessness of a lot of people, like, if they get Trump, there's nothing stopping them from getting me, as if we don't have other plays to run. And so, brother, I just got to tell you, I'm very grateful for you. Thank you so much for what you do. And where can people get more sanity like this from you?
So you can follow me at Davis Younts on Twitter. That's a good place to start. There's a lot of things that I try to comment on, information I try to share on that, but that's a great place to follow me.
Go do it, everybody. Appreciate you, brother. Thank you very much.
Thanks, gentlemen.
If you're single, get married. If you're married, have you some kids. And if you have kids, dunk them in some water and baptize them. Until tomorrow, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. What did I just say? Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is Cross Politic. Woo, and pray for revival. We need it.
Amen.